gosh. Okay. Okay. Ugh. Hey, everybody. I'd like you to meet my dog, Mosby. Now, Mosby is not only a very good boy, but he is also a purebred golden retriever. You're heavy, dude. Okay. Hold on. Here. Have a cookie. Have a cookie. Good boy. Okay, you can go. So, Mosby is a purebred golden retriever. And if you've ever wondered what it means to be a purebred, it basically means that his ancestors, his parents and his grandparents, were all golden retrievers, and there's documentation to prove that. So when we got Mosby, we got this document along with him. It's called the litter certificate, but it's also called a pedigree. And it basically is a family tree for Mosby. It tells us the names of all of his parents and grandparents and great grandparents, as well as the code that's associated with them. And I haven't done this, but I assume that you can probably go and look up even more information about these dogs. So, for example, his father was named Titus and his mother was named Shelby. I met both those dogs. Very, very sweet dogs. Part of the reason why I actually decided to get Mosby. His grandparents were Snow Bear, full name Lake Country Mountain Snow Bear, as well as Morning Star, and Cooper and Trixie were his other grandparents. And then there's also his great grandparents on here as well, which I won't read you. But so you may have heard the term pedigree in association with purebred dogs or horses or anything like that. And that's what a pedigree is. It's a family tree. So we're talking about that today, not necessarily specific to dogs, but for any species, we're talking about pedigrees. And we're also going to talk about the genetic, the way that you can track genetic information using pedigrees. So let's get to it. The essential question we're hoping to get to, and that I'm going to ask you to do at the end of this lecture, is I want you to be able to write an example pedigree using a family. Now, this could be your own family, or it could be a different family. It could be someone else's family. It could be a family from a TV show. It could be a family from a book that you read. Really, any family. The most important thing is that you are going to practice the skills that you're going to learn in this lecture. Now, this image to the right here, this is a pedigree, which is basically a chart that shows how individuals are related to one another. And as we're going to talk about a little bit later, um, the shading of these individuals is significant, and that is showing a little bit about the genetic component of how these individuals are related to one another. So we'll get into that later. Now, when you write a pedigree, this is the system that is generally used. There are a number of other symbols that are used as well for more specific circumstances, but this is kind of the basics. So squares represent males, circles represent females. If you are tracking a specific disease or trait, anyone who is shaded in, whose shape is shaded in the pedigree, has that trait or that disease. A horizontal line between a male and a female represents a mating pair. And so you're going to have a vertical line and another horizontal line descending from that horizontal line that connects them to their offspring. So this is showing that this female and this male are the offspring of this male and this female up here. These Roman numerals, we'll talk about that in just a second. If you have identical twins, they descend from the same point on the horizontal line for an offspring generation, and then they're connected in the middle. This doesn't mean that they are a mating pair. It means that they're identical. So horizontal lines are used for a couple of different purposes. And if they're not identical twins, they still descend and kind of form a triangle descending from the same point, but there's no line connecting them. In a generation, siblings are always placed in order of birth from firstborn to lastborn, or in other words, from oldest to youngest. And then they're numbered in that way as well. So in this offspring generation here, this would be individual 1, individual 2, and individual 3. And that's the order in which they were born. So this is the oldest, and this is the youngest. Now, just using those skills that you just learned there, what I'd like you to do is try to construct a pedigree for the following example. So I'm going to stop talking for a few seconds, and what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to pause the video, draw a pedigree for this family, and then I'll show you how it's done. Okay, I hope you had a chance to pause the video and give this a try. Let me show you what this looks like. So I'll switch over to my document camera. Perfect. Now we have a man and a woman who are going to have a son first, then a set of identical twins. Let's start by drawing the man and the woman using a square and a circle. And I'm going to draw a horizontal line between them because they represent a mating pair that had offspring. So we'll draw a vertical line and then another horizontal line. Now they have a son first and then a set of identical female twins. So those twins are going to descend from the same point on the line like that. And since they're identical, we'll draw a line between them. Now for fun, let's actually assign some names to these people. So we'll call the father, we'll call him Buzz, and Bo will be the mother. And then the son, we'll call him Tuna. And the two twins, they will be, here, let me make this bigger for you. They'll be curry and pasta. All right, so that's the first couple of generations. Now it says, then their oldest son marries a woman and has a set of fraternal twins, a boy and a girl, followed by a son. So Tuna gets married to a female, and we'll call her Barbie. And they have a set of fraternal twins, a girl and a boy. Ooh, those are kind of oblong shapes. The girl's name is Nashville, and the boy's name is Malibu. No line connecting them because they are not identical. And then they have a son. And his name is John. So that's what that pedigree should look like for that family. So at this point, hopefully you feel pretty good about those basics, just using shapes and lines to represent a family tree, a connection between individuals, and an ancestry tracking across multiple generations. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to incorporate genetics because that's what we're talking about in this unit is genetics. And so one of the ways that pedigrees are really, really useful is that they allow you to track and then predict genetic information about individuals within a pedigree. So take a look at the pedigree on this slide. We've got a couple generations, and we have some shaded individuals here. Now remember, shaded individuals are shaded because they have a trait that we are tracking, that we're interested in. And in this case, the trait is blue eyes, which is a recessive trait. So these three individuals have the recessive trait of blue eyes. So can we write their genotypes next to them? Well, if they have the recessive trait, it means that they must be homozygous recessive. You might remember that. That's the only way that an individual can have a recessive trait. So all of their genotypes are little a, little a. Great. Why is that useful? Well, let's take a look at the other two individuals. And actually, before I spoil it for you, I'm going to ask you to pause the video for a few seconds and see if you can figure out what the genotypes of these two unshaded individuals are and then after a few seconds, I'll tell you how to do it. Okay, I'm going to tell you what their genotypes are. They are both heterozygous individuals. How do we know that? Well, let's look at this male here first. He has the dominant trait, which means that he must have at least one dominant allele, right? We know that. So the question is, or I guess the question was, is he homozygous dominant or heterozygous? And you can determine that based on the rest of his pedigree. If you were just looking at him, you'd be like, oh, yeah, he doesn't have blue eyes, but I don't know if he's heterozygous or homozygous dominant. But by looking at his pedigree, you can determine which one it is because he has offspring who have the recessive phenotype and the recessive genotype. And in order for them to have two copies of the recessive allele, they must have gotten one copy from their mother and gotten one copy from their father, which means that he has to have had a recessive allele to give. So he must be heterozygous. Now let's take a look at this individual. This individual also has the dominant phenotype, which means that they must have one dominant allele, but are they heterozygous or homozygous dominant? Well, if we look at their parents, we know where the dominant allele came from. The dominant allele must have come from the father. And so the other allele must have come from the mother. And what alleles does she have to give? Only recessive alleles. So this individual can only have gotten the heterozygous genotype. And so you can see here why using pedigrees in addition to genetic information can be super useful. You could know for certain some genetics about individuals that you never had the chance to DNA test simply by using some detective work and the presence of traits within their pedigree. It's pretty amazing. Now, again, I'm going to pause for a moment. And what I'd like you to do is using everything that you've just learned, tell me or write down everything that you can tell about this individual circled in red. And a couple things to note, the trait we're looking at here is freckles. So everyone who is shaded in has freckles, and shaded is the dominant trait, right? Or freckles is the dominant trait. So go ahead, write down everything you can about that individual. You could write 20 things if you wanted. Pause the video, and I'll come back in a couple of seconds. All right. Well, you may have written a number of different things about this individual, but here are some examples of what you may have written. You may have written that individual III6 is female, does not have freckles, is the youngest of six siblings, all of which have freckles except for her. Both of her parents have freckles, which means that both of her parents are heterozygous carriers. Be They must be heterozygous and each have the recessive allele because that's the only way that she could have gotten two of them. We could go on and say more about her grandparents and her siblings and the fact that she's one of five daughters and has only one brother and all different things. We could say many different things, but that gives you some examples. So at this point, what I'm going to ask you to do for your essential question for the day is to write an example pedigree. Choose a family, could be your family or any family from a fictional universe or anyone that you know, and write an example pedigree. Try to cover a few generations, maybe at least three generations. Try to include, say, 10 individuals or so. But the most important thing is that you're practicing using the symbols and the technique for drawing pedigrees that you just learned in this lecture. So I hope that you enjoyed that. I hope you found that interesting. Say hi to your dogs for on behalf of myself and Mosby if you have animals, and have a great one. Until next time, I will